The Division 2 was a game with so much potential. A pandemic ravaged Washington, D.C. Tight tactical combat and cooperative gameplay really set the stage for greatness. But somewhere along the way, the cracks started to show. Bullet sponges, burnout loops, neglected PvP, and with the Division 3 now in the works, this video is part wishlist, part reality check. It's almost a deep dive into what needs to change for the series to level up. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and make sure you vote in the polls. And drop your wishlist down in the comments below. I'll be featuring the best takes in the next video. So looking back, one of the most universally criticised mechanics in the Division franchise is bullet sponge enemies. These are enemies that take an absurd amount of damage before going down, regardless of the realism or tactical logic. In the Division 2, this was especially jarring. You're using military-grade assault rifles, armor-piercing rounds, grenades, but somehow a guy in a hoodie with a baseball bat seems to absorb it all like he's the Terminator. This issue itself can kill immersion. Combat stops feeling tactical and starts feeling mathematical. A bit more about ticking damage numbers than smart positioning or weapon choice, and it also messes with the pacing. When every encounter is a drawn-out war of ammunition, it numbs the stakes. Even boss fights lose meaning when there's no clear design or strategic weaknesses, it's almost just an inflated health bar. This was most noticeable during solo play. Enemies weren't just tough, they were kind of annoying. You'll unload clip after clip after clip and start wondering if the game was balanced around a completely different type of player count. It felt less like a third-person tactical shooter anymore, and more like an MMO grind. And in terms of a fix, the solution isn't just about lowering health bars. It's about designing enemies around tactical weaknesses, not endurance. Think smarter AI, I've mentioned this in a previous video. Enemies that use flanking routes and coordinate suppressive fire and to pin you down and adapt to your playstyle. Let us defeat them because we outmaneuver them or manipulate the situation, not just because we had better gear. And I'm not against tanky enemies, and if you do want that, that's fine, but contextualize it. Give us an enemy in an exosuit, let him block bullets with his shield and create a weak spot we can hit when we charges. I have seen previous examples of this and I think it needs to be utilised more often. That way the fight then becomes dynamic. It's not just about numbers and it's not a bullet sponge. Now moving on to the second thing I want to bring up here, the repetitive grind. In the Division 2, the grind started strongly, but it quickly became one of its most annoying flaws. Early on, don't get me wrong, you're unlocking gear and you're trying out new builds and you're pushing forward, but when you start to hit that endgame, it just becomes a loop, and it's not really the satisfying kind. Initially, you get that satisfaction, but as you're rerunning and getting the same loot most of the time, you've already beaten dozens of these missions and you're farming recalibration materials hoping for tiny improvements instead of actually unlocking gear. The progression system flattens out and the carrot on the stick becomes smaller, blurrier, and ultimately meaningless. And there is a bit of a psychological element here too. Grinding can feel good when it's tied to mastery, discovery, or novelty, but in the Division 2 it feels much more like a to-do list. Clear this control point, kill 20 enemies, and the game tried to stretch thin content over a long timeline without injecting new mechanics or tension. And that is the trap that they fell into of content recycling. Yes, it does keep players busy, but it doesn't keep them engaged. What The Division 3 needs is a grind that actually rewards you, and it feels rewarding, it doesn't feel required. Imagine a world where missions kind of rotate modifiers weekly. One week it's fog of war and limited ammo, and the next week enemies can cloak and ambush. Now suddenly your different builds matter, you're not just farming for numbers, you're adapting and you're reacting. Finally make that loot meaningful. Give us gear with wild game-changing effects, something that doesn't just raise DPS, but it actually reshapes the way that we play. And moving on to the PvP, the lack of a PvP focus, or should I say, in the Division series, PvP always looked promising, but it rarely lived up to it. The Dark Zone was the most ambitious idea, a high-risk, high-reward areas with insane conflict, but poor balancing and inconsistent TTK and pretty much limited updates really left it feeling half done. And worse still, Ubisoft didn't move on from it. There were moments of brilliance with like tense extractions or unexpected betrayals from rogues, but they were the exception, not the norm. And then you move to the total opposite where everybody was rogue, there was never a fine balance. Outside the DZ, the PvP conflict mode was even more underdeveloped. It lacked proper ranked systems and rewards were pretty terrible, and matchmaking often felt kind of broken. And then you have obviously the technical side of the online game. You had the netcode issues, inconsistent hit reg, and latency problems. They were always frequent complaints, especially in higher skill brackets, and in a tactical shooter, milliseconds do matter. When the player base feels like the devs have abandoned competitive integrity, they stop playing. What the Division 3 needs is the PvP to be treated as a core pillar of the game, not a side project. First off, give it structure. Introduce dedicated PvP modes with objectives. Capture and hold, secure the VIP, territory control. Give us skill-based matchmaking. I know sometimes we always say we're against it, but give us a little bit to at least make the game fair. And secondly, lean into the Dark Zone fantasy hard. Build a living PvEVP zone where player squads can hunt bosses, extract rare loot, but also get hunted. Make the rogue status mean something. Maybe tie player bounty systems into the factions. Let PvP players influence the map. And finally, support it long term. Offer ranked ladders, seasonal cosmetics, PvP only builds and unique vendors. And if you invest in PvP players, they'll invest in your game. Despite being visually stunning, the world of Division 2 was largely static. The map was rich in environmental detail, but lacked those reactive elements. Once control points were captured or missions were completed, the map itself didn't change. And players wanted to feel like their actions had an impact, but the world itself didn't evolve meaningfully even after major victories. The city remained in a perpetual state of chaos, and the factions never really lost their footholds on the map. The Division 3 should implement a persistent world state that reflects player influence. For example, if you clear a district, let the civilians take over and add signs of recovery, like shops reopening and patrols, reduce enemy activity, and also, life going on. People setting up stalls, communities forming, not just at the bases, but in general on the map. And then alternatively, if you ignore an area and let it degrade, factions reclaim it and build stronger fortifications, tie this system into the gameplay loops. Make the world state a dynamic, player-driven layer of content. It's a big job to do, I understand this, but can you imagine the game if they managed to pull it off? And on to the storytelling. For a franchise that was set in post-pandemic apocalypse almost, The Division has always struggled with delivering storytelling. The main plot is decent, but it's vague, and the mission dialogue is kinda dry, and your characters are one-dimensional. Most players couldn't even name some major NPCs outside of one or two, let alone actually feel connected to them. The emotional stakes were there, but they were low, and the narrative often felt like background noise to the loot grind, especially during the endgame. As you're playing through the story, of course you're kind of emotionally connected to that if you're honing on those story missions only. But once you get to the endgame and the PvP elements, the content isn't really there. Let the player speak. Let's have some conversations. Let's have some voice options, some choices in how we respond, and have that have a knock-on effect. We've seen it in plenty of other games. Let's implement it here. Build on that emotion. In terms of like endgame as well, like I mentioned, it did promise in Division 2 an elaborate endgame, but the reality was more of the same. Repeatable missions with difficulty scaling, and once players reached World Tier 5, they were kind of met with some redundancy, not challenge. Raids were introduced, but limited accessibility, especially for solo players, meant most of the player base never really actually experienced them. Without compelling reasons to return beyond loot grinding, players dropped off. Endgame in the Division 3 needs to be about mastery, identity, and surprise. Introduce evolving endgame zones with unique modifiers that rotate weekly. Scalable raids with matchmaking and solo variants as well. And introduce new factions. Where's the new factions? And get some rotating invasions that disrupt those safe zones. Make chaos happen. Make random chaos happen. Give players a reason to log in beyond numbers and loot. Introduce different systems, collectible sets that you can earn, and mastery boards with skill-based challenges almost. Build player hubs that reflect your accomplishments, a sense of place and identity in the world. The endgame should be where players thrive, not just where they wait for the next content patch. In the Division 2, the different enemy factions often felt interchangeable. While obviously you had visual difference, you had the cleaners with the flamethrowers, the true sons with more military gear, combat against them usually was exactly the same. The behaviours rarely forced players to actually change tactics. Once you mastered your build, it was just rinse and repeat regardless of who you were fighting. In the Division 3, factions should be more than just different skins on the same behaviour enemies. Each should feel like its own ecosystem with different strategies. Imagine one faction that fights in tight formations and calls in random drone strikes, and another that uses cloaking tech and uses ambushes to overwhelm you. And then you have one that's just heavy in numbers, but vulnerable to certain weapons. Make players respect and fear different factions. Give them reasons to prep specific builds for each one. I think that would be an incredible turning point for the game. And on to the gear system in Division 2. It did try to offer deep customization, but ended up almost overwhelming with clutter. You had multiple stats, recalibration libraries, brand sets, exotic traits, armor tiers. It became almost a spreadsheet simulator. And worse, the UI didn't support that complexity with any sort of clarity in the menus. Players often didn't know what mattered most or how to make different impactful decisions because we got lost in the UI. The gear in the Division 3 should still be deep, but it needs to be readable and doable. Use clean visual layouts. Highlight key synergies. Let's make sure we have the build template so we can switch and save in between, and reduce meaningless stats in favour of like gameplay shaping perks. Let new players build and explore, and give the veterans the tools to craft at a high level. And lastly, I'm going to move on to one of the biggest and best things Ubisoft and Massive Entertainment ever did with the Division, and that was, in my eyes, the survival DLC. This was one of the franchise's best received modes, but its DNA didn't carry over into the main game. There was little environment hazard, hunger or stamina systems or anything like that, and crafting depth was minimal. The post-apocalyptic setting begged for a more immersive survival mechanics, but they were pretty much ignored. And in my wish list here, I want to mention the need to integrate the survival into the core game. Harsh weather should affect your visibility and health. Nighttime should feel more dangerous. Crafting should matter, repairing gear on the go, building traps, enhancing vision. Make survival a layer that enhances both solo and group play. I think survival was one of the best things The Division ever did, and I really want to see it incorporated into the main video game loop. So, The Division 3 is a chance for the franchise to reset, to learn from the past, to double down on its strengths, and finally deliver the full tactical RPG experience fans have been waiting for. So I want to see your wishlist drop below. Which features are you most hyped for, and what mistake can they not afford to repeat? Let's make sure that the devs are listening. Like if you agree, vote in the polls, and subscribe for more Division deep dives. And until next time, stay sharp, agents.